You can't force people to become doctors and nurses. What you can do is attract people to become doctors and nurses. But you can't do that when you don't pay them enough. Migrant workers have been the absolute backbone of the health service forever, right? It's clearly like a dog whistle for racists who are too worried about how many brown faces they see at the end. He's 18 points ahead in the polls. He doesn't need to pander to racists. Even the Liberals are coming out with statements saying that they are frustrated with the things that he's saying here. So one of the things that was brought up in that segment that we just watched from Byline TV was regarding the history of people from outside the UK working in the NHS and being the backbone, right? Migrant workers have usually been the backbone of the NHS and have been for a very, very long time, right? And that we have, well, because of the links that we have with places like the Commonwealth and places like the European Union, we have for a very long time relied on migrant workers to come into and work in the NHS. As nurses, as doctors, for a very, very long time, right? This is a really recent interview. An interview that I've just brought up here with Keith Starmer on the Sunday show with Martin Geisler, where Keir has some things to say about that. So we're going to watch the interview, I'm going to have a bit of a reaction, and then I'm going to discuss some of the fallout from this interview that happened on Twitter as well. So let's start off by watching this, see what happens.
Right then, as if any of us need reminded, times are tough just now, and with the UK Right then, as if any of us need reminded, times are tough just now, and with the UK expected to fall into its longest ever recession, they're about to get even tougher. So our politicians faced a whole host of difficult choices. If you were with us on the Sunday show last week, you might remember the Health Secretary, Humza Yousaf, told us the health service in Scotland isn't performing as well as it should. The Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, says Brexit has hammered recruitment. Put simply, we can't find enough nurses and doctors here in Britain. Well, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, spent the end of the week on a visit to Scotland, and he came into the studios to speak to the Sunday show. I started by asking him about immigration. Might that be one solution to the healthcare crisis? Apparently not.
We don't want open borders. Freedom of movement has gone and it's not coming back. So that means fair rules, firm rules, a points-based system. I've
discussed on the channel previously how a points-based immigration system is actually bad for working people, right? And that the advantage of immigration is that if you are of the understanding that the vast majority of immigrants are going to come in who are going to be, the vast majority are going to be low, quote-unquote, low-skilled, right? They're going to come in and they're going to expand the workforce, but also expand the consumer population so that the economy expands, meaning there's more jobs overall in the economy. If you don't have a points-based system, and there is a lot of people coming in who are going into kind of entry-level jobs, what that means is to be able to deal with the additional workforce, more people are going to get promoted to managerial positions, and they're mostly going to go to the native population. So having a points-based system where you only bring in people who fill in those managerial positions means that it's actually less likely for regular working people of the native population to get ahead. So actually a points-based system is like the worst of both worlds, because you actually make it harder for the people who are on the low incomes to be able to go up the hierarchy, because you've filled the place at the top of the hierarchy with people from outside the country. Well, but also in general, you just want the population to grow because you want more economic growth. Just lax immigration rules means that we just get a higher economic growth, meaning there's more jobs for everybody, right? The idea that we undermine people in the country by taking their jobs doesn't exist, because the number of jobs increases, the population does. So just want to, before we have any of the discussion about immigration, just want to nip that in the bud right away about this myth of the idea that immigrants come over and take people's jobs, because that's just not true in the slightest. So let's just nip that in the bud right now. If you want to argue with me in the comments, feel free to do so. It'll just boost the video in the algorithm. There's a jury maker who just do a little tours visiting hospital car with all our orders. Margaret working in the NHS, friend from Italy's parents and nurses who currently work for the NHS, don't see how being a doctor or nurse isn't top level for points. I mean, it's really strange, right? He's saying we need a points-based system, yet he's about to say in this interview something that will contradict that.
I would like to see is the numbers go down in some areas. I think we're recruiting too many people from overseas into, for example, the health service. But on the other hand, if we need high-skilled people...
Yeah, which makes no sense. As you just said, Iron Mage, surely, if we're going to have a points-based system, the people who are going to have the most points in that regard are going to be people who are very highly skilled, such as doctors, right? What the hell is he talking about? Like, first of all, as was said in that Byline TV segment that we watch, migrant workers have been the absolute backbone of the health service forever, right? We're going to be talking about the nurses' strike in another segment on the channel. But so everyone who was watching who wasn't aware, nurses have voted for strike action in this country. The reason why they voted for strike action in this country is because they get paid very poorly, considering the amount of work and time and effort that they put in. There's, as we saw in the segment earlier as well, there's a shortfall of 40,000 nurses that needs to be filled, 100,000 empty slots, essentially, for people working in the health service. The idea that we're going to just fill this up by not hiring migrant workers is nonsensical. First of all, because, you know, we have basically got close to full employment at this point in the UK. We're basically at close to full employment. So where are we going to recruit these people from if we don't recruit them from overseas? And the answer to that is, okay, well, we're going to train more nurses. We're going to train more doctors. We're going to train more healthcare professionals. Okay, well, first of all, you can't just force people to study a certain thing. This isn't the Futurama universe where people get mandated a certain job to do based upon some kind of state-mandated aptitude test. That's not a thing that happens. You can't force people to become doctors and nurses. What you can do is attract people to become doctors and nurses, but you can't do that when you don't pay them enough. And Keir Starmer has been on record. I shall bring up the bit now. Let me find it. I think it might be in my other tab actually. Where is it? This is the one where Keith is on record as not saying that he supports pay rises for nurses. Have I flipped that the right way? I've not. Flip horizontal, that's what I wanted. Right? He's got a record saying that he doesn't support pay rises for nurses. Considering, and he's not said he also backs the strike either. We don't pay these people enough to attract people into the workforce either. Why would you spend huge amounts of time in the education system, considering how many years you have to study medicine to be able to actually qualify to be a doctor in the NHS? Spend all of that money just to get paid fucking shit, right? Most nurses and doctors will, especially nurses, right, don't get paid enough. He doesn't back the strikes. Just listen to this.
And you were in charge of their wages, would you grant it?
Well, there's a mechanism to decide would let that run its course. But I empathise, I understand why nurses are in the situation that they're in, why they're considering industrial action. But I don't want a strike to go ahead. They don't want a strike to go ahead.
Would you back it and would you grant it?
Well, there's a mechanism for dealing with their pay, and
He can't just say yes. He can't just say, yes, we need to increase their pay. And there's two good reasons for this. First of all, they fucking deserve it. They do incredibly hard work. They're the backbone of our society. We need these people to have a functioning society. So let's pay them more because they deserve it and because they've had to deal with, you know, cost of living crisis just like everybody else. We have nurses using food banks. It's a national disgrace, right? They deserve that money because they work hard and they deserve to get paid more. That's one reason. And second of all, just as in the segment that we're watching, we need to attract people to the health service. And why are people going to be attracted into working in the health service when they could get more money becoming a fucking investment banker, or by becoming a landlord, or by doing any other amount of nonsense jobs that the world doesn't need? The world is always going to need healthcare professionals. And if we don't pay them enough to incentivize them to becoming healthcare professionals, they're not going to fucking do it, are they? It's not difficult. It's not difficult at all.
Would want that to run its course.
I don't think anybody wants to see nurses.
And this is Andrew Pierce, like, literally calls himself Tory boy Andrew.
Go on strike. They're hugely popular. They've been underpaid for decades.
So what would you do?
For decades. I'd pay them more money. I simply would. Yeah. I mean, they're after 17%. They're not going to get 17%. Inflation is 10.1%. I think their pay rise works out about 7%. They've got to have a pay rise that matches inflation.
If you came into power...
See, literally, that is like a guy who is like a dyed-in-the-wool Tory, saying that he would just 100% give nurses a pay rise that matches inflation, and fucking Keith can't even get behind them when they're going to go on strike. He's the party of the trade unions. They're represented by, I believe it's Unison, which is one of the trade unions that is literally affiliated to the Labour Party. What the fuck is he doing? This is nonsensical. Absolutely nonsensical.
In innovation in tech to set up factories, etc., then I would encourage that. So I don't think there's an overall number here. Some areas we need to go down, other areas we need to go up.
The whole,
but we
the whole
need
problem with the
fair...
health service is that it's got a crisis of staffing.
Yes, exactly. And that's why we were able to set out at our conference just a few weeks ago in Liverpool how many more people, 7,500...
Allegedly, it's so completely without substance, right? When he's asked, what are you going to do? He's just like, we will do the good things, right? We will give you the extra staff. How are we going to get the extra staff, right? It's literally, it's so bargain basement, his position that he has is just, don't do the bad things, but we will do the good things, and won't give us any amount of actual prescription as to how he's intending on doing any of this stuff. Despite the fact that he's also plainly doing this to just dog whistle to people who fucking hate immigrants, right? It's clearly like a dog whistle for racists who are too worried about how many brown faces they see at the NHS. I've heard this shit from my own people I'm related to, right? Like the older members of my family, right? Who I love to death, obviously, right? I love these people, right? But that doesn't make the racist statements they make less racist. And I've heard these things firsthand, that people will talk about the amount of faces non-white faces they see within the health service, because especially older people, that's going to be the public service that they actually have the most contact with. And it's just this plain, it could be using this to create an entirely different narrative, but he doesn't care, right? He doesn't care about any kind of morality about the positions that he's holding, right? He just wants quick fix. Let's not change any narrative. Let's not challenge the assumptions. Let's not challenge anything. Right? Let's just try and be able to court the racist vote. Let's just try and... racists might not be voting for us yet because they think we're too weak. Let's just be performatively racist and try and get their votes regardless. It's so fucking cynical. It's completely cynical. We literally... I mean... the twirling towards freedom, that is far more substance than I've ever heard from Sir Keith. But he's the Red Party, so he's a socialist soy. I know, right? I've got to say, it's the Red Team. It's the Red Team, right? Although, to be fair, in the wake of what's happened here, right, even the Liberals have caught on. Even the Liberals are coming out with statements saying that they are frustrated with the things that he's saying here, right? So if you look here, here's Richard Murphy. Now, I know he's pretty much affiliated with kind of the left-leaning side of the Labour Party, right? What's the point of Labour? When they can't back nurses in the NHS, do they have any role left apart from sucking up to the city whilst proposing fiscal rules that guarantee austerity? True. Like, 100% true, right? Where was another statement that he made about Keir's position regarding... Yeah, there we go. What do you call someone who says a person should not get a job in the NHS because they're foreign? Obviously, Keith, 10 out of 10 banter stream title. Thank you, Tartines, my loves. Appreciate it. He doesn't even have a catchy slogan to back up his no substance promise like get Brexit done. Well, it's, let me be clear, we need a fresh start, we need Labour government. That's all it is. That's all his fucking slogan is. That's all he comes out with. It's just like, let me be clear, and then proceeds to not be clear or give any actual substance to anything. He just says, let me be clear, I believe in good stuff and I believe the puppies are cute. Please give me any substance or policy, for fuck's sake, Keith. Like, what do you call someone who says a person should not get a job in there just because they're foreign? There's racism. Like, it's flatly racism. Like, I saw there was another person on here. Let me find who it was. Yeah, Professor Nisreen Alwan. I can't help the feeling that Starmer is taking my vote and the votes of people like me for granted, and he shouldn't. And that's true, right? We're already seeing it right now, where even people who are members of the Labour Party, or who were previously and have now left, are now removing their support for Keir Starmer. I'm glad that the Liberals are catching on to this shit. That the Liberals are finally going, well, hang on a minute. If we spend the entirety of our time where, you know, essentially saying that we're going to lend Keir Starmer our votes regardless, and then he's just saying, well, hang on, if I believe that this whole swathe of kind of the liberal progressive side of the left in this country, right, not leftists, but kind of the progressive liberal left in this country, are votes that he will never have to chase because they have nobody else to vote for, which is true, then he's always going to posture into a position where he thinks he can win over people from the other side of the fence without changing the narrative, right? Because again he doesn't actually care about, you know, the actual utility of the positions that he holds. all he actually really cares about is getting into power in the first place. Now, I think there's a reasonable case to be made that even if he does say shit like this, right, does say all the stuff where he just kind of panders to the, you know, the racist crowd about with regard to NHS staffing, then all he's doing this is saying this for posterity, right? He's not actually going to follow through with that, with any of the stuff that he's saying, which, you know, maybe he will, maybe he won't. But there is something to be said in the fact that he's not trying to create a challenging narrative. Fuck it, he's 18 points ahead in the polls. He doesn't need to pander to racists. He can just come out and say immigrants are the immigrant labour is the backbone of the NHS. The idea, you know, if anywhere should need additional staffing from people from different countries, if anywhere should be, it should be the NHS, right? Very, very simple. I don't think, like, if, for example, that this was the next election was theoretically on a knife edge, I could get it, right? I could at least understand his desire to be able to want to win over certain sections of the electorate for electoral reasons, right? I could get, he doesn't need to, he's fucking 20 points ahead. He is literally the 20 points ahead meme right now, but he's still trying to woo people from, you know, reactionary positions over to the Labour Party. He doesn't need to do that. He could try to move these people over ideologically, but he doesn't care actually about the utility of the positions that he holds as long as he's able to use it for additional electoral clout. It's incredibly frustrating. Like, I don't believe that this is, like, I've seen a lot of leftoids on Twitter say, well, this is just what Keith really is. And I don't think so. I don't think that he's just this dyed-in-the-wool racist that people are kind of saying that he is. But when you've got people like Richard Murphy and Nisreen Alwan, you know, coming out and saying he shouldn't be saying this shit, right? Then, you know, hopefully people on the liberal left who are saying this stuff can actually start moving over on these positions, right? But so many of them have just taken up the, we're not going to vote for anybody else, so we will, you know, because I mean, even in the replies to this, there's people saying, you know, you can't criticise him because he's Keir Starmer, we have to get the Tories out. Because again, they only believe in red team good, blue team bad. They don't actually believe in the efficacy of the positions that people hold and the narratives people spin and the, you know, what these narratives will do to the political discourse in this country, right? If the main opposition, right, the main opposition that is, again, 18, 20 points ahead or whatever, depending on which poll that you look at, is reifying their narrative about, you know, immigrants being a drain on society, then that narrative is never going to change, you know, overall. In the same way about regarding, you know, the private sector with regards to, you know, where the power should be in society, with the workers or with the owners. And when we have a we have a party who, again, Keir Starmer is being attacked by his own MPs over his lack of support for a wealth tax, which, if you watch any Gary Stevenson's videos, and I will absolutely agree with Gary Stevens, we need to be able to deal with the, you know, the ever-growing gap between the rich and the poor in this country. And Scribby, you're right, he doesn't need to do this. He's like, I don't think I mean, he's scared of giving wholehearted support for the unions. And I know that this is another one that I actually get the reason why for Scribby. Like, I actually do get the reason why he's trying to distance himself from the unions, because I think that the voter base that he's trying to get through to are people who still remember the 1970s Labour government, right? There are still a huge swathe of people who won't vote Labour, not because of the Iraq War or because of, you know, the lack of social housing or because of, you know, being beholden to the financial sector that happened during the Blair years, right? All the bad shit that Blair did during the Blair years. But these are people who are wholly, their whole reason to dislike Labour is because they fully believe that if they are someone who are beholden to the unions, that we'll get a rerun of the 1970s, right? And I understand their concerns. Peter Obon's got a good article about this on how, you know, the Labour Party in the 70s was so beholden to the unions that is essentially kind of the corollary to what we have now, where instead of it being the unions who are controlling the purse strings and controlling the policy platform of the Labour Party in power, it is now the billionaires and, you know, the donor class who are holding the rings of power and holding, you know, holding the strings of power, sorry, and creating the policy platforms moving forward. And things like the think tanks too, right? Now, I also agree with Peter Obon's conclusion in that article in the times when we were beholden to the unions was better, but that's it's still a reasonable concern people have that we could be driven into a future wage price spiral if we have a Labour Party that's fully on the side of the unions. But there's a difference, right? There's a difference between being the man who is being controlled by the unions, which Starmer clearly fucking isn't, right? And being someone who is too scared of his own shadow to even stand with the unions for things that have wide-scale public support, right? For affiliated unions, no less. It's not like the RMT, who are divorced from the Labour Party and have been for the last 18 years or so. It's 2004 that the RMT split from Labour, or were kicked out of Labour by Blair, right? But this is Unison. Unison is an affiliated Labour union, and he wouldn't even stand with them. He wouldn't stand with the CWU over postal strikes either. In fact, invited the Royal Mail over to the Labour Party conference. The people who the affiliated union are fighting against for pay and conditions, who are looking at having huge amounts of jobs stripped out of the mail service, so that they can pay additional dividends. That's rancid, right? And you even stick by them, right? And the public support the posties, the public support the nurses mostly, and they're pretty much on the fence with regards to the RMT. He could at least say, for example, something like, in that clip we saw, he wouldn't even say basic shit, right? If you wanted to not give unequivocal support for the unions, but wanted to give us better idea, give the public an idea that he sees the value of nurses, he would say, look, we don't think that this position is something that should be necessary, right? The government should be paying nurses more. We believe that the work that nurses do is invaluable. We need to attract more people into the health service, so they should have a pay rise, right? Do I think that strike action is something that they should be doing? Then you say, well, no, strike action is something that we should always be trying to avoid, right? Strike action is something of last resort. That's something that they have to choose for themselves. But if the government wants to avoid strike action, they can come to the negotiations, and if they gave them a pay rise, the strike action wouldn't be happening. That is a perfectly reasonable stance to take. There isn't full-throated support of the unions that would scare away the people who are trying to compare him to Harold Wilson or James Callaghan. But it's enough of public support for striking workers that you somehow question the overall narrative. One of the funniest moments in the Alistair Campbell diaries was when Kinnock was actually going to chin Blair when he said he wanted to have a closer relationship with the bankers. Kinnock's wife Glenna stopped him from decking Blair. Jesus. But it's an interesting point, right? I saw a clip on TikTok earlier today talking about Tony Blair whining about how the Labour left don't want to work with anybody else in the party and they want to take the party over and they want to change the party. I'm like, no, that's what you did, Blair. Your guys are the entryists. No matter whether it was, when it was Wilson or Callaghan or Foote or even Kinnock, there was still a social democratic policy platform. They may call themselves democratic socialists, but they're just a social democratic party, and they basically have been since their inception. And even Kinnock, right? I was reading the 1992 manifesto earlier today. The 1992 manifesto had nationalisation of the national grid as part of the energy policy, right? The 1992 manifesto had something similar to the inclusive ownership fund that was going to give businesses tax breaks for giving share options and stock options to employees to be able to create cooperative funds and to make the private sector more cooperative in nature, right? That was up until 1992, up until John Smith, right? It was only Blair when it changed to a third way platform where he gave full-throated support of neoliberalism at the time, right? And it's Blair that then shaped the party in his image. The entryists are the Blairites, right? They're the people who changed the party. The Corbyn wing was the people bringing it back to a social democratic platform. And you see this in Jeremy Corbyn was elected with a majority against 3 other candidates in the first round of voting in 2015, right? It's very, very clear that the vast majority of the Labour membership still support the Corbyn platform, even before the gigantic surge in membership after Corbyn became the leader of the party in 2015, right? And it was the Blairites who then refused to work with Corbyn and tried to oust him in 2016 when he increased his majority in the vote. It's clearly, the Blairites are the entryists, right? And Corbyn wanted to work with these people and was eviscerated for it, right? If he'd have been more ruthless, we wouldn't be in the position that we're in now, where Starmer is, excising people with the wrong political opinions, removing them from long lists for liking the wrong fucking tweets, right? That's the position that we're in. And it's the right of the party that are the entryists and not the left.
New people recruit into and train into the health service from here, training people in, and we explained how we would cost
well,
that.
certainly the experience.
But this position is untenable when he wouldn't even support a pay rise for nurses to attract people into those positions in the first place.
In Scotland seems to be that people just aren't applying to train. There are places that are vacant that are being funded by the Scottish Government for midwifery and nursing that can't be filled because people just don't want to join the NHS. Well, so if we can't get them from here, where do we get them from?
Well, we certainly...
And it's cheaper. It would be cheaper just to be able to hire people from overseas into the health service rather than having to dole out huge amounts of money in bursaries to be able to train people up. Like, I think you should be doing both, right? I think that, you know, for example, something like university education should be a general right that everyone should have access to for free, like it used to be before 1997. But Keir Starmer has dropped his pledge for free university education, which would, which actually would help us to be able to recruit more people into the health service from the UK. But because it would make it more affordable, rather than having to dole out grants to everyone who wanted to be able to join the health service. And even then, the grant wouldn't even cover the vast majority of the actual amount of time and money you have to put into becoming a medical healthcare professional through university. Question from 255. You know how the Tories want to make it illegal for vital workers to strike? Do you think Starmer would at least not do that if he was in power? Yes, absolutely, 255. One of the things that, you know, Starmer and everyone in the Labour front bench have been clear about is reversing anti-strike clause from the Tories. I think that's the only thing that I trust them on currently.
We need to drive those numbers across the whole of the United Kingdom, and those numbers can go up, and I think they should go up, and we need funded places to drive them up. But of course, one of the reasons that...
But why would they when they're getting paid shit? Like, this is an untenable position, Keith.
The NHS is struggling is because it's such hard work. The conditions are so hard because the NHS has been run down. My wife works in the NHS, so this is a daily conversation about how tough it is.
I wonder what the migrant workers in the NHS, Keith, who know your wife, are telling her about the things that you're saying about them.
In her hospital. It's really tough conditions. We need a long-term plan. All we get...
What does she tell you the problem with the NHS is? What does she think the solution is?
We haven't got enough people. We haven't got enough people.
But you don't want to use
neglected.
immigration as a solution for that? Well,
I think that we should be training people in this country. Of course, we need some immigration, but we need to train people in this country. What we've done, this is...
I think the thing is, I think if Keith didn't at least support repealing anti-trade union laws, the trade unions would start pulling their support. I know Sharon Graham and Dave Ward have both been pretty vocal about how on the fence they are with continually being affiliated to the Labour Party.
Absolute classic of this Tory government is short-term fixes, plasters over problems, never a long-term solution. And we go round and round in circles. Every year we have a winter crisis. Here in Scotland, we've got, 1 in 7 people on the waiting list. That is a total failure of the government here in Scotland. 1 in 7 people in Scotland on a waiting list. That is a statistic that ought to be sort of pinned up there on every little billboard across the whole of Scotland. It's totally unacceptable.
Let me ask you about a broader immigration question, about Brexit. I mean, it is demonstrably clear from
I don't know, 255. That's an interesting question. Keir Starmer, wife, NHS. Occupational health worker. Whatever that means.
economic data that Brexit has been damaging to the UK economy. Why do you support us continuing to stay outside the EU?
We took a decision on leaving the EU in...
Oh, shut up about Brexit. Fucking hell. I know Scottish people didn't want to do it. But if you want to go back to the European Union, just leave. Just get independence. Like, I want you to understand there's going to be some questions about, like, India F2 in this debate. And of course, I fully support Scotland's right to self-determination. I know that Keith will refuse to, give these people the democratic vote that they won, and they clearly have the mandate to, considering the SNP's power in Westminster and in Holyrood, right? But that's a conversation for another day. But yeah, this is a completely untenable position for Keith to take in this particular discussion, right? And I'm very glad that even the Liberals are somehow picking up on this. Although someone who is very clearly entirely devoted to Starmer's position on this one is, of course, Supertansky. So, like, Starmer wasn't misinterpreted. He voted Remain. He didn't want this nightmare, but he'll inherit it. He has to straddle two opposing sides because shit is tense. It's a tinderbox waiting to go off. Disagree with the stance he's forced to adopt, but he's backed into a corner. Yeah, the 20 points ahead corner of I have to, you know, dog whistle the racists because, you know, we might start losing support if we do. And again, like, you know, he's literally 20 points ahead. He could just shape the narrative and say this will be better. He doesn't need to be scared. This is nonsensical, right? Just say that it's bad, Super Tansky. Fucking hell. You've had enough democracy for now. Well, it was 2014 since the last independence referendum, right? I'm sure if the same shit was going on in, like, I don't know, the Soviet Union, suddenly everyone in the UK would be critical of it, right? Or like that referendum is supposed to be happening in Uzbekistan, where half of it's supposed to secede from the union in Uzbekistan. If there's anywhere else, people are like, why aren't you giving them referendum? Why aren't you allowing them self-determination? But they just won't do it. But that, I mean, not having the money to do it, Samson Dutsi, is a product of the fact that he also won't commit to wealth taxes and shit like that. Like, if we just increase taxes for incredibly wealthy people, based upon their wealth rather than their earnings, because the differential between money earned through wealth and money earned through earnings is one of the big issues in our country, we would be able to have the money to spend to be able to fund this shit, right? But again, he's trying to avoid his position on tax rises, because he doesn't want to upset, you know, the boomer homeowner class who feel like that if there's a wealth tax, then suddenly that will affect them, right? Despite the fact they never will do. But they just vote based upon vibes of who they think will be bad for them based upon the amount of wealth they currently have, right? I think that's a real issue. Like, it's frustrating, right? Because I want to be able to posture not voting Labour because of this stuff to try and move them over. But, you know, as someone pointed out in chat, right, that I basically have no choice other than to vote for Labour. And I will, because the candidate in my local area is a really nice guy, and I think he's a proper socialist as well, proper leftoid. So my vote for Labour is entirely contingent on the guy standing who stood last time. He's a really cool dude. But if there's any other situation, like, I would not want to vote Labour. Like, the fact that, you know, they're continually taking you know, performative stances, you know, to appease racists and to appease transphobes. They were just essentially saying that, you know, my vote is entirely taken for granted. I mean, and true, and whoever pointed out in chat that I do have nobody else to vote for, that's also true. Maybe, I mean, it depends what the polls look like up to election time, right? And Starmer's letting him stay in. I mean, it remains to be seen, 255. We shall see as soon as, you know, long lists and short lists come up. But he's a really nice guy. He's a local councillor as well, so he's had a long time within the Labour Party. But I think that what we need to see, like, because it's not even people saying that they won't vote for Labour, right? Because you don't need to say, I explicitly won't vote for Labour to be able to start moving opinions or start helping shape the opinion at the top of the Labour Party, right? If the Liberals just, for once in their fucking lives, stopped defending Starmer over everything just because their single desire is we must get the Tories out, they would still be able to push back against this stuff. If they just admitted that I want to get fewer foreign workers in the NHS, and I believe that we should kick trans women out of women's spaces, were both positions that they thought were reactionary dog shit, right? And they voiced these opinions publicly, then we could be able to have a discussion, and maybe we'd see some kind of change of direction. But they won't even say that, because they don't want to criticise Starmer at all, because they're too invested in this, you vote red no matter who type shit. Because at least people, I don't know, for example, let's have a kind of similar position. Let's compare this to, for example, people, you know, voting for Biden in the 2020 general presidential election in the United States, right? Where even people who were incredibly pro-voting for Biden, for example, let's take WORST as a case study here, were still vociferous in their criticisms of Joe Biden, right? And they would push back against people who said that you couldn't criticize them for being liberals who had no ambition and who didn't actually care about the utility of policy, which I think the position that I would take right now, and I think that liberals should be taking moving forward, right? But the kind of the big difference is, though, is at least when Biden was campaigning, he was at least trying to be able to create this kind of unity, this kind of trying to build some kind of unity ticket, which clearly Starmer just isn't trying to do. He's taking a huge group of people and saying, you literally cannot vote for else, fuck you, don't care about any of your opinions, fuck off. Let's try and court this mythical swing voter with performative reactionary positions, right? Which Joe Biden never really did. Like, Joe Biden never really did that, and he was always happy to lend at least some credence to progressive positions. Let's take that out. There's also the other thing, for example, that, you know, Donald Trump was like an existential threat to humanity as we know it, and the GOP continues to be an existential threat, and the same with the Tories just aren't quite the same as, right? But don't want to have to discuss the opposition. I want to just discuss the platform here, where Biden tried to build a unity ticket that Keir Starmer just doesn't want to do. In fact, quite the opposite. He wants to expel and excise members who disagree with his fucking, you know, with his centrist group, when he believes they can win the election without the left. In your general area, Labour doesn't stand a chance. They lost what little base they had to the Lib Dems because everyone went insane over Brexit. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what the polls look like in your area. Even in the southwest, like an anti-Labour stronghold that has been an anti-Labour stronghold for decades and decades, even throughout the Blair years, right? Even places in the southwest are looking like that Labour might be the candidate, that Labour might be the party that is best positioned to beat the Tories, right? The kind of the game's been changed with regards to that since the, you know, the Liz Truss fiscal event nonsense that happened. Like, Labour are ahead of all other parties in the blue wall overall. So it'll be worth looking at the opinion polling if you want to vote tactically, for example, what's happening in the area Iron Mage. It'll be interesting to see what does happen. But I know if yours a particularly kind of anti-Brexity area, then they may stick with the Lib Dems even so, because Keir Starmer has been explicit in his desire not to overturn the Brexit referendum, but also not to go back into the single market customs union or to join some kind of EFTA arrangement, because he's crazy. Because single market customs union, EFTA, something like that, that's like electoral gold, right? 60% of people think that Brexit was a bad idea. And even then, you wouldn't be reversing Brexit. You'd just be having an economically rational position to take advantage, or to at least kind of find some kind of band-aid position to deal with the fact that the UK's gigantic trade deficit is really hurting our economy in a post-Brexit world, which we could fix by joining EFTA, or like an EFTA kind of style agreement, which maybe we might not even get, but at least trying to do so to get a better trade agreement with Europe, whilst also having trade agreements with elsewhere as well. Like, seems like the best of both worlds if we had an EFTA arrangement, but I digress. He could adopt those positions. So maybe if you're in a heavily Brexity area, maybe you're best off in Lib Dem. I mean, Lib Dem is certainly better on social policy. Like, they're extremely pro-trans, they're pro kind of drug reform, shit like that. So you might get better policy on that kind of stuff from the Liberal Democrats. I'm not sure. And maybe, you know, having a more kind of even balance of power in Parliament, rather than just this massive kind of red wave, might be better overall, especially with something like trans rights as well. We'll see. But then it depends how much Rishi Sunak decides to tear up. But the issue is that I don't think Starmer would then reverse that. The kind of the middle-class liberal clique of turfoids, they clearly are having a grip over, you know, the direction of Labour Party policy, because they're a much bigger voting, like, electoral demographic than trans people are, or pro-trans people, or people who are pro-trans enough to not vote Labour because of them being anti-trans. So of course he's going to appeal to these people, because electoral demographics is the only thing that ever gets into Keir Starmer's head, because he's obsessed with electoral demographics rather than, you know, the morality or utility of a policy position. They vandalised the Weatherspoons bathroom with second referendum stickers. Fucking hell, maybe it is a really Brexity area. Like, the tactical voting script is going to be ripped up at the next election, so it's definitely worth kind of checking. used to get your grandparents to vote Green since they refused to vote Labour. Well, maybe let's try to get them to move over on Liberal Democrats. If they're homeowners, they might get an extra 300 quid. Way! Fucking the worst the policy you've ever seen from the Lib Dems. I don't know. It's tough. It's tough to know what to do. Like I said, I'm basically forced into voting Labour, which I wouldn't do. I'm in such a tight swing seat. I think it's only like 1,000 votes in my swing seat. At the next election, it's certainly going red. So I might even be in the position to be able to vote for someone like the Greens, or if Breakthrough or CPB are in my seat, I might be able to chuck a protest vote their way, right? Under the assumption that the candidate would win anyway. New Labour didn't repeal Section 28 until 2003. Well, that's true, actually, yeah. Although it was still mostly Labour MPs that backed it, as far as I'm aware. I'm not sure. I don't know enough of history on that, but clearly, the Labour base is. It's clear that there is at least some amount of the people who Labour trying to appeal to who are socially reactionary, right? But that's why you need to have a strong economic platform so that you can win these people over regardless of their social positions. You just say, look, the economic needs are what matters to you specifically. Let's win you over on the economic sphere. But he's doing the opposite. He's abandoning them on the economic sphere and trying to win them over on kind of the reactionary social sphere. Like similar somewhat to Blairism in that regard. It's gonna create the same kind of situation that we had, that Eddie Dempsey was talking about, where by keeping it as a kind of liberal platform where we're not going to be economically radical, you're going to push away members of the proletariat, right, who would be amenable to economic reform, but they're not going to. If they don't get that, then they're going to drift away from Labour policy altogether. And if they continue to be able to blame people like migrants for their economic woes, where else do you think they'll go? Why else do you think that we had, when people started blaming migrants in the 2000s, we had a resurgence of the far right in this country? This is because there was no leftist platform for these people to be able to be won over on an economic basis, and so they obviously. Because the electoral coalition of the Labour Party was built between the middle-class homeowners that they'd won over in 1997, with a bunch of kind of socially marginalised people who had no one else to vote for. The people at the bottom of the working class and who needed structural economic reform never fucking got it. And so where do you think they drifted to when they were hearing people demonise migrants or whatever, brown people? They were the easy people to capture for the far right. Generally surprised the Green Party of England and Wales still haven't publicly addressed the Scottish Green Party cut ties with them over institutional transphobia. Well, they can't do that because, again, their electoral coalition is a bridge between incredibly progressive pro-trans people and, kind of liberal middle-class people who don't feel won over by a kind of Labour Party that wants to win on some kind of electoral coalition, but are also fucking rabidly transphobic. Your constituency is nearly perfectly 50-50 on Brexit. Interesting. Maybe it will be a Labour seat. Then we'll have to see at the time. But again, it's going to have to be trying to convince a bunch of people who are, going to be pro some kind of European integration that that they can vote Labour on some other nebulous grounds. But again, they might just vote it because they want to get the Tories out again. But how can you, if you are somebody who believes that Brexit is doing huge economic damage, because it is, and you really, really want to reverse Brexit, even though it would be anti-democratic to do so, how are you going to attach yourself to a Labour Party? You won't even admit that the Brexit has had economic damage. It's a real weird tightrope that they have to walk, and they're just doing it in all the wrong way. They're just kind of trying to win people over on reactionary rhetoric. I don't know. I'm no Nostradamus. I can't tell you, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. But again, this line that Starmer's taking, I think, is a dangerous sign of things to come, where he will continue to court a social reactionary vote, like him kind of, stepping away from people like Just Stop Oil. I get it, because Labour don't need to care about Just Stop Oil, because Just Stop Oil are only there to be able to oppose the Tories. As soon as Labour get into power, their flagship policy is 100% green energy. Just Stop Oil love that shit, right? but they know that it's bad optically to attach them to people who just everyone fucking hates, which fair. I understand why they do. So it's a really simple, it's a really simple own goal for Keith to disown Just Stop Oil as an activism group, whatever. Like, fine, I'm not that bothered. But when he does performative racism, that's when we really have to start drawing the line.